Hey y'all, I'm JD and welcome back to the Dimensions Woodworks Woodshop.
Today I'm going to show you just how and why I built this cart for my Fuji Spray setup. Let's get started. So I first got this idea when seeing Mike Coffey's Fuji Spray Cart that he had built for himself. I'm going to put some links to Mike's stuff down in the description. Check him out on YouTube and Instagram. But I did go ahead and make my own design using Shaper 3D for the very first time, and it was an exciting process. So go give Mike a like, a view, check him out. He's always doing a lot of really cool stuff on Instagram and YouTube. For the joinery for the cabinet, I just went really simple. Cracked pocket holes and screws with a little bit of glue to reinforce those joints. Because I built the cabinet out of all scrap material that I just had laying around the shop, I added a few extra supports to ensure that the cabinet remained true and square. Right here in the lower back portion of the cabinet is where I was going to add my holder for the external filter. I used the same size filter that I used in my home because I knew that I would always have that size filter on hand. I keep them readily available and change them out whenever needed. I framed it out with a piece of 3/4 inch material, which just so happened to be exactly the thickness of the filter, and that worked out great. I framed it up around it to house it, then used 1/4 inch sheets of plywood to hold it in place. Then I began to break down the pieces for the drawer boxes. On this particular construction, I chose to use the same piece of hardwood for the drawer front and the drawer face, so there's just a single piece of poplar in the front. I ran through dados in each side and the back of the drawer box, and then used a stop dado on the drawer face so that it didn't have holes on either side. Just using this plunge cut here and pushing it until I get to the stop point of the cut. All those dados will accept the bottom panel of the drawer. I used the same method to assemble the drawers as I did the cabinet, just pocket hole screws and glue. Along with that dado in the bottom panel, it makes for a really strong drawer. Now to install the drawer slides with the help of the Craig drawer slide jig. This jig makes this process super simple. It is turned inward into the cabinet to set the drawer slides and then flipped around to accept the opposite side that actually gets mounted to the drawer. It just makes this process so much easier to have that as a guide. Then it was time to begin the door construction for the door that will be on the bottom of the cabinet that opens to gain access to the Fuji Spray system itself. With all the cope and stick joints cut on the rails and stiles of the door, it's time to just add a little glue and clamping force, and it holds everything together nicely. Then it's time to break out another one of my favorite Craig jigs, the concealed hinge jig. And I use those little quick grip clamps from Craig as well. I promise none of this is sponsored. I just really like their products, and they come in handy for the tasks that they're designed for. Then I just had to mount the cabinet portions of the hardware. These are the Blum clip top motion hinges. I love these hinges after being turned on to them by a fellow maker. They are so easy to install. It seems they make the doors easier to install, as a matter of fact. And they have that nice soft close feature as well. So for this cabinet, I chose to make my own drawer pulls and door handles. I'm going to go in much more detail on this, and when I have the video up, I'm going to put a link to that video right here so you can check that process out. It's really easy, and sometimes it's really just the best fit to make your own pulls for the style you're trying to go for in a particular project. When making these drawer pulls, I remove the bulk of the waste as much as I can at the table saw, then I finish the cut safely at the bandsaw, and I'll continue to shape it by hand, both with a plane, sandpaper, rasps, whatever the design calls for in the particular application I'm working on. After I'm happy with the shape and style of my drawer pull slash door handle, I go ahead and transfer the marks so I can cut the recesses on the drawer faces and the door to accept the pulls, and they will be seated firmly in these locations. I cut the two far extreme points that the handle will rest in with a thin curved handsaw, in this case a Japanese pull saw, and then I'll remove the rest of the waste with a router and clean that cut up with a chisel by hand. Then I used my woodpecker T-square to go ahead and lay out the two holes that I will need to have access points through the side of the cabinet. One will be for the power cord and the other is going to be for the air hose coming out of the turbine. I'll use the masking tape and super glue trick here to glue a backer board on the opposite side of the cabinet carcass so that when the Forstner bit goes through, it doesn't blow out the back side of the hole. Then to create the hose reel, I chose to use kerf bending, just making several small cuts really close together, almost to the top veneer of this piece of plywood to make it flexible enough to mold into the shape that I would like for the air hose holder. So to give myself something solid to attach that kerf bent piece of plywood to, I just used these step out blocks off the side of the carcass, and then I later cut a shape that mirrors that arc to attach to the side of the carcass, and that way I can have somewhat stable surface to connect that bent piece of plywood to. After I had it clamped in place temporarily, I made this layout line, then used a large piece of tracing paper to transfer that mark, laid that piece on a piece of carbon paper, and transferred that arc over to the next piece that was to be cut. Because that kerf bent piece of plywood doesn't have a lot of its own structural integrity, I wanted to give it something really solid to mount to, both on the side next to the cabinet and the extreme outer point of the hose reel itself. So once I had this shape, I just doubled up and laminated two pieces of plywood together against the side of the cabinet, and then cut a dado in the opposite side of the hose reel. That would be the outside edge. I checked the fit against the piece that had the dado cut in it, and made adjustments where necessary until I had a really nice fit. The glue is what's really going to hold this thing into place, but in order to keep it there while the glue dried, I used the small finish nail with a broader head on it, because on the opposite side of this piece of plywood there's not very much material to grab to. I gave myself a little strip of plywood there at the top as well to give me something to screw to from the outside for the outer portion of the hose reel to be held into place. I used the single screw and that small strip of plywood at the top for a pivot point. Then once I was comfortable with where it was, I clamped it down into place and let the glue cure. And because I want the cabinet to be mobile and be able to move it anywhere I need it in the shop or even possibly outdoors if the situation arises, I went ahead and mounted these casters on the bottom with locking wheels so that I could move it around with ease. Once I had a good fit on everything, I just removed all the hardware as well as that filter and began the finish sanding process to prepare to spray the finish on it. So now I use my Fuji spray system to spray the cabinet that my Fuji spray system is going to live in. So to permanently hold the drawer pulls and door handle into place, I use a bit of wood glue as well as some super glue for a quick hold, and the wood glue gives me that really strong hold over time. I prepped that area beforehand, just removing all the finish so that the glue had a good surface to stick to. When I was prepping the drawers for finish, I masked off this area where the drawer slides rested, just so I would have a really quick and easy reference point to go back to when it was time to reinstall the hardware. Then once I have all the hardware reinstalled, it's time to go ahead and put everything back into place and do any final adjustments that are needed to make sure that I have a proper reveal all the way around the drawers and the door. Then I reinstall the air filter and put the backer panel above that air filter so that it's got a nice airtight seal, and all of the air coming into the unit must pass through that filter. In keeping with trying to make sure that I kept as airtight of a seal as possible, I use these rubber grommets to allow the hose for the turbine as well as the power cord to come out of. Then it was time to get the unit installed and get everything ready for a test run. I wanted to add a couple last little accessories to the cabinet. The first is this DIY paper holder, which I'm going to do another more in-depth video on. I'll put a link to here. And then I also added a gun holder to the top so that the top of the cabinet could be used to mix my finishes and load the gun.
Thanks so much for watching, y'all. As always, I really do appreciate it. Don't forget to like, comment, share, subscribe, and ring the bell notification so that you can be notified when we release new videos. I'm going to put a link to Mike's plans down in the description because I stole the idea from him, so I don't want to take any credit for the idea for this build, but I did make my own modifications to his design. Namely, the big thing is the external filter on mine. Get creative and see what you can come up with. And until next time, don't forget to get better every day.